The morning my son called and gave me a 30-day deadline to leave the land these very hands had built, I was already holding a secret large enough to overturn everything he thought he had locked down. But he had no idea. He had a realtor, a signed listing agreement, a buyer ready to put down $378,000, a closing date circled in red like a victory already written, and a freshly pressed jacket hanging on the door, as if everything had been settled long before it began. He had calculated every number, planned every move, spent an entire year pushing pieces across a board he was completely certain only he could see, and the worst part, he believed I hadn't noticed a thing. He had no idea I had been watching all of it for a very long time. I did not stop him, did not warn him, did not make a single call to slow down the machine he was running with such confidence. I let him go all the way to the very edge of that certainty. Let him believe, right until the final moment, that I was just an old man with nowhere left to go. Then I stood up, and just one call from my attorney, quiet, precise, and ice-cold, erased everything he had spent an entire year carefully building. But that is still not the worst part, because this story has not even begun yet. My name is Calvin Reeves. I am 69 years old, retired structural engineer. 41 years of calculating load-bearing tolerances, stress fractures, and what happens when the wrong pressure is applied to the wrong joint at the wrong time. I built a career around understanding precisely when and why things break. Turns out that skill applies to more than steel and concrete. It applies to families too. I moved to Asheville, North Carolina in 1984. Same year I married my late wife Miriam. We raised 2 boys in a gray-sided Craftsman on Clement Hill Road. Derek came first, 1,985. Nolan 2 years behind him. We taught them both to fish. We drove used trucks and never once bought anything we couldn't hold in our hands and say plainly, this is worth what we gave for it. Miriam used to say the difference between people who are happy and people who are rich is that happy people already have everything they need. She said it with a grin because she'd have liked a few more things too. That was love. In 1995, I bought a half-acre lot on the eastern shore of Lake Adder, 11 miles west of Asheville, off Route 74. The lot cost $28,000, which at the time felt like betting both kidneys on a single hand. Miriam didn't say a word. She looked at the paperwork for a long time, then she said, "You'd better build something worth looking at." I spent 3 summers doing exactly that. Derek was 9 when we broke ground. Nolan was 7 and more useful than his brother because he actually listened when I explained what I was doing. The Heron Cove cabin went up board by board, and when it was done, it was ours in a way that nothing we could have bought ready-made ever would have been. Every joint, every window frame, every rafter, I knew exactly what held it together because I had put it there myself. Heron Cove became the family compass point. Thanksgiving weekend when the boys were in college. 4th of July when they had their own lives and needed somewhere to put them down for a few days. Deer season every November, which was really just an excuse for the 3 of us to sit in the cold and not talk about anything that mattered, and be completely at peace with that. When Miriam was diagnosed in 2016, we spent her last good summer at that cabin. The boys drove up every weekend without being asked. We sat on the dock with our feet in the water and let the time pass the way time passes when you know it's running short. We didn't waste it on words. Miriam died in January 2017, and 6 months after I buried her, I took a drive. I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed to be moving. I pointed the truck northeast on Route 70 and let it carry me past Black Mountain, past the gap in the ridgeline where the pines get thick enough to block the afternoon light, past the stretch of county road where the cell signal drops and the whole world goes quiet. I ended up on an unmarked gravel lane above a lake called Crowley Pond that doesn't appear in travel magazines because the people who know about it prefer things that way. There was a lodge on a raised lot above the waterline, which any structural engineer will tell you matters more than square footage. Stone construction, 3 bedrooms, a fireplace you could stand inside, a wraparound porch facing west, which means every single evening, without exception, you get a sunset that makes a man remember what it felt like to believe in something. There was a for sale sign at the end of the drive. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes before I got out. I bought Ridgecrest Lodge in September 2017 for $280,000. Miriam and I had been savers our whole lives. Used trucks, no debt, nothing we couldn't pay for outright. That was the philosophy Derek called old-fashioned. Derek had a lot of opinions that turned out to be wrong. I placed the property inside an irrevocable trust, the Miriam Reeves Family Trust, handled by an estate attorney in Asheville named Marcus Vega, who had nothing to do with any of the family's other legal business. I told exactly one person on earth about that lodge. My old friend Roland Fitch, retired county property recorder, 71 years old, who knew land documents the way some men know scripture, chapter, verse, and consequence. Roland never asked why I wanted it kept private. That is what a real friend looks like. The boys never knew Ridgecrest existed. For 7 years they came to Heron Cove, sat on my dock, asked about my plans with a little more enthusiasm than the question ever deserved, and performed what I can only describe as the arithmetic of inheritance. I noticed. Engineers notice structural problems long before they become critical. I just didn't say anything yet. I am a patient man by training. Derek had changed over the years. Not all at once. It never happens all at once. It happens the way a load-bearing beam develops a hairline fracture, invisible until one day it isn't. He'd married a woman named Vanessa who had a particular talent for spending money that hadn't arrived yet. He started steering conversations at family dinners toward the cabin like a man who had already done those calculations privately. He said things like, "The lake property market is insane right now, and someone should be protecting those assets," with a tone that made plain that the asset he was most interested in protecting was his own future. Nolan went along because Nolan always went along with Derek. Softer than his brother. The kind of man who mistakes agreement for peace and has never learned that they are entirely different things. I noticed all of it. I didn't say a word. Then came the Sunday phone call. Derek's voice had that quality, careful, rehearsed casual. "Hey, Dad." I said hey, and waited. The throat clear that I'd known since he was 16 and had something to confess. Then, "Nolan and I have been talking. About Heron Cove." I set down my coffee slowly. I said, "Go ahead, Derek. Tell me what you've decided." He didn't catch the edge in that. He laid out his case. The market was strong, the property taxes had climbed, the dock section on the north end was overdue for replacement, and they'd already spoken with a realtor named Glenn Harwood out of Waynesville who thought they could list comfortably at 370, maybe 400,000. He said, "We like it was already his." "When did you speak with a realtor?" I asked. "Just to get information," he said, "before we brought it to you, so you'd have the full picture." The full picture. My son got a real estate valuation before he got his father's permission. Let that breathe for a moment. I asked to speak with Nolan. Shuffling, quiet voices, and then Nolan already apologetic before he'd said a single word. I asked him whether this was his idea. A long pause. Derek brought it to me first. But I think the numbers I said I'd heard enough. I said I'd call them back. I hung up. I sat on the porch at Clement Hill Road for 45 minutes. Just me, a mockingbird doing its impressions, and the specific kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind that presses on your chest and stays there. Was I angry? Not yet. Was I hurt? I was devastated. 69 years old, and my boys had gone behind my back, shaken hands with a stranger over something I had built nail by nail, and it hadn't occurred to either of them to ask. But here is what nobody tells you about getting older. You stop reacting. You start responding. There is a significant difference between those two things. I went inside. I opened the bottom drawer of my kitchen desk, the one Miriam called the serious drawer, because nothing light or good ever came out of it, and I pulled out a manila folder. Inside that folder was a deed. Not the Heron Cove deed. A different address, a different county, a different story entirely. I read it slowly, even though I had it memorized. Then I smiled for the first time in 3 days. 2 days later came the Thursday morning call. Derek's voice had shifted from careful to decided. He had crossed some interior line over the weekend, and what lived on the other side of it was a man who had convinced himself he was already in charge. "Dad, we've made a decision. We're listing Heron Cove. We've already signed with Glenn. You need to make arrangements to clear your things out by the end of the month." And then, with the particular confidence of a man who believes the old man has lost his edge, "We're moving forward, with or without your sign-off, Dad." I let the silence stretch, 3 full seconds. Then I said, "Derek, which property do you think I'm sitting on right now?" That silence. The kind between lightning and thunder when you are not yet sure how close it is going to hit. He said, "What do you mean?" "You're at Heron Cove." I said I hadn't said that. He said, "Then where are you?" I said, "I'm exactly where I need to be. You go ahead and list Heron Cove. You and Glenn Harwood out of Waynesville. Do all of that. I'll talk to you soon. I hung up. Let him sit with it. Here is what Derek did not know. Yes, my name sat on the Heron Cove deed alongside both sons, an arrangement I had set up years ago to simplify estate planning. What I had never once mentioned was that co-ownership on a North Carolina property deed does not give any single party the unilateral right to transfer title. All co-owners must provide written consent before closing. All of them, including me. Glenn Harwood either failed to verify this or chose not to, because Derek presented the family as aligned. Glenn listed the property. He scheduled showings. He generated an offer within 3 weeks from a couple out of Charlotte named Phil and Sandra Okafor, professionals in their mid-40s who had been looking for exactly this kind of mountain lake property for 2 years. Good people, from what I could tell. Wrong transaction entirely. The offer came in at $378,000. Derek called me, practically vibrating. Dad, we got an offer. Strong one. 378. We need your signature. He stopped. I heard it, that small hesitation. The sound a man makes when he arrives in a room shaped differently than he expected. On the closing documents, he finished. I said, yes, I'd imagine you do. He said, it's just a formality, Dad. You're on the deed, so they need all signatures. Standard procedure. I let that breathe for a moment. Then I said, Derek, do you remember what I asked you last Thursday? Which property I was calling from? I'll call you Friday, I said. The Okafors need an answer by then. Thursday, I drove down to Asheville and sat across from Marcus Vega in his office on Merriman Avenue. Marcus was 46, the kind of attorney who enjoys a well-constructed legal problem the way other men enjoy a good meal with full attention and no rush. I laid the complete picture across his desk. The Heron Cove listing, the offer, Derek's calls, the deed structure, the trust documents, all of it. Marcus leaned back, fingers steepled, and looked at me the way a chess player looks at a board when the checkmate is 3 moves out, and none of the other pieces can see it yet. He said, your son listed a property he cannot legally close without your consent. Correct, I said. A buyer is sitting on an offer, waiting. Also correct. And your son called this a formality. His exact word, I said. Marcus gave a small, precise smile. He reached for his legal pad. So what do you want to do here, Calvin? I folded my hands on the edge of his desk. I want to let it get all the way to the closing table, I said. I want Derek to put on his good jacket and shake that man's hand. I want Nolan to stand there in his hands, in his pockets the way he does when he knows something is wrong. I want Glenn Harwood to open his folder and uncap his pen. And then I want you to make one phone call. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. He said, you planned this. I said I planned for the possibility. There is a difference. He laughed. Actually laughed, then reached for his legal pad. The closing was scheduled for a Friday morning in November. The title company was called Lakeview Settlement on Biltmore Avenue. Clean office, good parking, the kind of place where large amounts of money change hands with very little ceremony. Derek had called me twice that week to confirm I was coming. Once to ask if I needed directions to a street I had driven past hundreds of times. He thought I was slipping. He thought the old man needed a hand with the map. I told him I would be there at 9. I was there at 8:47. Derek arrived at 2 minutes to 9. Navy jacket. Something in his posture I recognized immediately, the posture of a man who has already spent the money in his head and is here for the formality of signing. Nolan was behind him, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the room the way Nolan's eyes always moved when he knew something was wrong and couldn't locate it yet. Phil and Sandra Okafor were already seated, Phil with the firm handshake and the forward energy of someone who had been looking forward to this morning for weeks. Sandra with a quiet smile and a folder of her own. Glenn Harwood sat at the head of the table, efficient and ready. The title officer, a woman named Denise Monroe, had the documents stacked and organized in her precise way. I sat in the corner with my coffee. Derek saw me and the tension dropped out of his shoulders visibly. He crossed the room, hand extended. Dad, glad you made it. We good? I shook his hand. We're fine, Derek. He smiled. That smile, the smile of a man who believes he has already won. He went to his seat. Denise Monroe began her opening remarks. Glenn uncapped his pen. Phil Okafor leaned forward, ready, Then my phone buzzed. Text from Marcus Vega. 3 words. Ready when you are. I stood up. Every head in that room turned toward me at once. I said, I apologize. There is a call I need to take. I looked at Glenn Harwood directly. My attorney needs to speak with you specifically. Glenn blinked. Derek's chair scraped back halfway. Dad, what I said, sit down, Derek, in a tone I had not used since he was 16 and had done something he could not undo. Something in it, something final. He sat. I stepped into the hallway. I called Marcus. 30 seconds. Then I walked back in and handed my phone to Glenn Harwood, and I watched his face while Marcus spoke on the other end. I watched the color leave his jaw. I watched the pen lower. I watched the exact moment a man realizes that the transaction he spent 3 weeks building is standing on nothing at all. Glenn Harwood said 3 words into the phone. Just 3. Say that again. A short pause. Then nothing. He handed me my phone back and looked at Derek and looked at the stack of documents in front of him and looked at Phil Okafor, who had shifted from eager to alarmed in approximately 4 seconds flat. Mr. Reeves, Glenn said carefully, and he was talking to Derek. Not me, this closing cannot proceed. Phil Okafor's chair scraped back. The room held very still. I want to stop here and tell you something honestly. I had no satisfaction in what Phil and Sandra Okafor experienced that morning. None. These were 2 people who had done absolutely nothing wrong. They had inspections done. They paid for an appraisal. They had told their friends about the Mountain Lake house. And they were sitting in a title company finding out that the transaction had been fundamentally defective since the day it was listed. Phil stood up and said to Glenn, with the controlled fury of a man who is accustomed to being composed but is reaching the edge of it, that he had listed a property he apparently did not have the legal authority to list. Glenn opened his mouth, closed it. Sandra had her hand on Phil's arm. Phil was already on his phone. His own attorney. Good. Some moments deserve their own counsel. Derek had not moved, still in the jacket, staring at the table in front of him, doing the mathematics on what had just happened to him. Nolan had his face in both hands. Marcus arrived at 9:31. Dark suit, leather briefcase, the unhurried energy of a man who is exactly where he intended to be. He placed 2 documents side by side at the center of the table, with the deliberate precision of someone laying cards. He walked the room through the deed structure, the co-ownership statute under North Carolina property law, the defective listing, the unenforceable purchase contract. He told Phil and Sandra they had a legitimate breach claim against the listing agent and potentially against the sellers, meaning Derek and Nolan, for entering a purchase agreement on a property they lacked authority to sell. He noted their inspection costs, appraisal, travel, and legal fees were recoverable. He suggested they speak to their own attorney, which they were already doing. He was thorough. He was done in 11 minutes. Glenn Harwood left first. He shook no one's hand. He said one quiet, tight-jawed word to Denise Monroe about following up on Monday. The door closed behind him with the specific sound of a man who knows he is about to have a very unpleasant conversation with his broker. Phil stopped at the door on his way out and turned to look at me. Not at Derek, not at Marcus, at me. He said, I'm sorry this happened to you. I told him I hoped they found something they loved even more. He almost smiled. Almost. Then they were gone. Denise Monroe gathered her documents with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had seen deals collapse before and understood that lingering helped no one. Out in 3 minutes. And then it was just us. Me, Marcus, Derek, Nolan. Marcus looked at me. I gave a small nod. He excused himself to the hallway and pulled the door closed behind him with a quiet, deliberate click. Derek spoke first. You let it get all the way here. His voice was different now, the certainty completely drained out of it. What was underneath it was younger, rawer, something I recognized from a long time ago. You let us list it, get the offer, sign the contracts. Sit down at this table. Yes, I said. I did. He pushed back from his chair, walked to the window, and stood with his hands in his pockets looking out at the parking lot. You could have called me after that first conversation, he said. Just called me and said, Derek, you can't sell this without me. That's all it would have taken. I told him yes, I could have. Then why didn't you? And here is what I told him. Because you needed to see it, not hear it, see it. All the way to the end. I held his eyes. You hired a realtor before you asked your father. You signed a listing agreement on a property with my name on the deed. You called me, and told me I had a deadline to leave land I had built with my own hands. I paused. What exactly did you think was going to happen, Derek? He had nothing. Sit down, I said, not cold. Final, he sat. I stood at the head of the table and looked at both my sons. Really looked at them. Derek in his jacket with his jaw tight. Nolan with his wet eyes and his hands folded like a man sitting in a church he no longer believes in. I took my time. I said, I need both of you to listen, not respond. Just listen. I'm not going anywhere. Heron Cove is mine, and I will be there every deer season and every 4th of July until my body says otherwise. You are still welcome there. Both of you. That has not changed. Nolan exhaled. His eyes were full at the corners. Nolan always felt things before he understood them. That was never his worst quality. Derek, I said, the Okafors are going to bring a claim against you. Their attorney will calculate inspection costs, appraisal, travel, and legal fees. Marcus estimates somewhere between $18,000 and $22,000. Derek's jaw tightened. That number does not end you, I said. But it is yours to carry, not mine. Not Nolan's, though his name may be pulled in depending on how their attorney structures it. And Derek, I waited until he looked up. Vanessa thinks this is done. You told her, didn't you? $378,000. She has already spent some of that in her head. He said nothing. That was its own answer. That conversation is yours to have. I won't touch your marriage, but every consequence sitting in front of you right now has your name on it. Not mine, yours. Because you moved first. You moved fast. And you moved without asking the one person whose name was on that deed. I turned to Nolan. I know you didn't start this, I said. I know Derek came to you with the plan already half-formed, and you went along because disagreement has always felt like a personal attack when it comes from your brother. But son, you are 37 years old. You are not 9. You knew this wasn't right. I could hear it in your voice on that first phone call. You did it anyway, Nolan said quietly. I know, Dad. I know. Good. Then what I am about to tell you won't be a complete surprise. I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a single folded document on the table. I did not open it, just let it sit there between them. Both of them looked at it. Yesterday morning, I said, Marcus and I made some changes. Derek's eyes came up slowly. The Heron Cove deed has been restructured. Both of your names have been removed. It now sits solely in mine, already recorded at the county courthouse as of yesterday afternoon. Flat silence. Dad, Nolan started. It's done, I said quietly. You wanted to sell it so badly. Now you can't. Because it's not yours to sell. Truthfully, it never really was. But now the paperwork reflects that fact correctly. Derek's hand on the table curled slowly. Not in anger. The way a hand curls when a man is absorbing something that physically hurts. And then there is Ridgecrest, I said. I unfolded the document and slid it to the center of the table. For the first time, I said the words out loud to them. The Miriam Reeves Family Trust. Established September 2017. An irrevocable trust holding a lodge property on Crowley Mountain, 41 miles northeast of Asheville, above a lake that does not appear on most maps. Neither of you has ever heard of it. Neither of you has ever seen it. For 7 years it has sat there quiet and patient, the way patient things wait when they know time is on their side. I smoothed the document flat with one hand. When I'm gone, I said, Ridgecrest Lodge transfers to a land conservation organization out of Hendersonville that preserves working waterfront properties across western North Carolina. They keep places like that wild and accessible, the way your mother would have wanted. The air went out of the room, slowly, like a tire losing pressure, like two men simultaneously understanding that the thing they had been circling for years, the thing that made them hire realtors and sign contracts and call their father with a deadline, was never going to have their names on. It. Not ever. Derek pushed back from the table. Walked to the window again. Same window, same parking lot, but everything beyond it had shifted into a different shape. A non-profit, he said. Flat. Empty. A non-profit, I confirmed. I want to say something here directly to anyone watching this right now. If you have ever been in a room where someone you love looked at you and saw only what you were worth, if you have ever watched a relationship curdle from something warm into something transactional, you know exactly what was happening in that room. And you know why it matters that Calvin did not shout. He did not rage. He let the weight of the thing do what weight does when you stop fighting it. He let it settle. If that were me, I honestly do not know if I could have kept that stillness. I do not know if I would have had the patience to let it get all the way to the table before I said a word. But I think that restraint is precisely what made the lesson stick in a way that an argument never could have. Derek turned from the window. And I want to be careful about what I describe on his face in that moment. It was not the entitlement of a man caught scheming. It was something older and more honest than that. It was a man who had looked in a mirror and seen something he hadn't been prepared to see. I didn't think it would go this far, he said. I thought we were trying to help. The taxes, the maintenance, you're up there alone, Dad. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, a man who is trying to help asks first. Whatever you have told yourself about your intentions, that is the fact of what happened. You hired a realtor before you asked your father. That is the beginning and the end of it. Is there anything left? Derek asked. And he meant it the way a son means it, not the way an heir means it. For just that moment he was not 39 years old in a good jacket. He was 9, standing on the unfinished subfloor of a half-built cabin, watching me work, wanting to know that things were going to be all right. What time does to people? What fear of being left out does to men who were once just boys handing their father nails. I looked at my oldest son for a long moment. Then I said, Ridgecrest Lodge was appraised last month. Do you want to know the number? He said nothing, waiting. $1.2 million. The number dropped into the room, like a stone into still water. I watched the ripples move across both of their faces, Derek at the window, Nolan at the table with his hands suddenly very still. That lodge, I said slowly, the one on Crowley Mountain with the stone fireplace, and the wraparound porch, and the kind of sunset that makes a man believe in things again, that was going to be your inheritance. Both of yours. Divided down the middle, the way your mother would have insisted. $600,000 each. Nolan made a sound that wasn't words. Derek stood at that window, and did not make any sound at all. You were trying to sell Heron Cove for $378,000, I said. Split 2 ways, $189,000 each. I let both numbers sit next to each other in the room long enough for them to feel the full distance between them. I was never hiding Ridgecrest to punish you, I said quietly. I bought it because I needed something that still felt like your mother. Something no one had put a price on. Something that was just mine and hers and real. I always intended it to reach you eventually. When it was time, that is all you did. You got impatient. You rushed the timeline, and in doing that, you changed the destination entirely. I buttoned my jacket. $1.2 million. I said it one final time. Not to twist the knife, just to make sure it was real. Fully real. The way consequences need to be real before they mean anything. That was going to be your inheritance. I hope the phone call was worth it. I picked up my coffee. It was cold by now. I drank it anyway. Then I looked at both of them. You are still my sons, both of you. That does not have a deed. It does not go in a trust. Nobody can list it or show up at a closing table and take it from me. I paused. But it has to be earned back. Derek, call an attorney today. Not tomorrow. Nolan, go home and sit with what you know about yourself after this morning. Don't run from it. Sit with it. I walked to the door. Dad. Nolan's voice cracked at the edges. I stopped and turned. We're sorry, he said, and I could see Derek's shoulders drop an inch at the window. His version of sorry. His version of agreement. I nodded once. I know you are, I said. I know. Marcus was in the hallway, leaning against the wall the way a man leans when he has nowhere more important to be. How'd it go? Like it needed to, I said. We walked out into the November morning, Asheville, cold and clear. The kind of sky that looks freshly polished. I sat in my truck for a few minutes before I started the engine. Then I drove northeast on Route 70, past Black Mountain, past the gap in the ridgeline where the pines get thick and the light disappears, past the county road where the world goes quiet. 41 miles from Asheville, I turned down the gravel path and pulled up in front of Ridgecrest Lodge as the last of the afternoon light went flat and gold across the water below. I sat on the west-facing porch. Just me. Just the mountain and the lake and the kind of quiet that costs nothing and means everything. Miriam, I thought, you would have had something to say about all of this. You would have shaken your head at Derek, felt every one of Nolan's tears in your own chest. You probably would have told me I was too calculated for my own good. And then you would have handed me a sandwich and sat down next to me and looked out at the water, and that would have been more than enough. I poured a drink and raised the glass toward the ridgeline. "This one's yours," I said out loud. "All of it. It always was." The water held its ground the way it always had. Still, unhurried, settled, like the man who found it. Heron Cove still stands on Route 74, 11 miles west of Asheville. My name alone on the deed now, the way it always should have been. Derek called Marcus about the Okafor situation 4 days later. The settlement came in at $20,400. He paid it. Vanessa did not take it well. They are working through it, which is more than I expected, and exactly what he deserves to work through. Nolan called me the following Sunday morning just to talk. No agenda, no angle, just his voice and mine, and 40 minutes of conversation that didn't contain a single dollar sign. That was a beginning. Glenn Harwood received a formal complaint filed against his real estate license with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. I did not file it. The Okafors did. Some consequences don't need your help finding their way home. Ridgecrest Lodge remains where it has always been, on a hill facing west, inside a trust no one can reach. When I'm gone, it goes to people who will love it the right way. Roland Fitch drove up in December, and we sat on the west porch and watched the ice begin to form at the edges of the water below, and didn't say much for long stretches at a time. That is the thing about a real friend and a real place and a life built on purpose and protected fiercely. They do not need a lot of words. They just need to last. And this one will. Now before I go, I want to ask you something. Drop a comment and tell me 1, 2, or 3. 1 if you think Derek deserved every single thing that landed on him and Calvin played it exactly right. 2 if you think Calvin should have said something before it ever reached the closing table, that patience crossed a line into something else. 3 if you've been in a room like that one where someone who was supposed to love you looked right through you and saw only what you were worth on paper. I want to know where you stand on this one. And tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. Because this community is made of real people in real places. And I think about that every single time I sit down to tell a story like this. If you have been watching for a while and you haven't hit subscribe yet, do it right now. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. I will see you there. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Asheville, North Carolina to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, events, or properties is entirely coincidental.